What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. With the return of the Legend of the Poro King game mode somewhat recently, I've become interested with this trend of temporary game modes that we've been experiencing. It's been most prevalent in League, but we're also seeing it a little bit in Hearthstone as well, and it's an interesting trend that is starting to develop. Let's get started. So the kind of game modes that I'm talking about are the ones where the developers introduce a game mode that has an innovative or unique aspect of gameplay to it, such as the game modes we see in League of Legends' Ultra Rapid Fire, One for All, and of course more recently the Legend of the Poro King, or in Hearthstone's Tavern Brawl where they rotate a new game mode in every week. So the first thing to understand is why these game modes are being treated this way, because there isn't too much of a history of games doing this in the past. In fact, it's a relatively new concept. Most games from the past would make these game modes permanent, or at least accessible in some kind of custom or private game lobby. Essentially what is going on here is that these temporary game modes are created in a way that they play off of the novelty and hype of constantly having a new game mode to try out or look forward to. Each new mode has some sort of gimmick or quirk to play around with, making every game mode fun to try out, just because it's so different to already existing or previous experiences. But since it plays so much off of the novelty, it does tend to get old a little bit quick, and pretty much all of the game modes end up being hit or miss. And because they lack depth, they aren't really competitive and they don't have the longevity that you might want from a permanent game mode. And by changing and removing them, it kind of keeps the novelty aspect of the game mode system going, and the concept is that the game modes don't really have longevity anyways, so it's not a huge deal to take them away after a week or two once the hype has died down. And if a game mode hits, you can hype it up again and bring it back, and if it misses, well, you don't have to worry about supporting dead content. And so there's lots of pros and cons that come with this kind of system. Starting with the positives, the first being with this kind of rotation that it allows you to make more game modes as a whole, since you don't have to exactly worry about making each one perfect since you know it's only a temporary game mode from the start. You can get away with releasing something that is unpolished or honestly just straight up unbalanced without it being that big of a deal, meaning that you can spend less time on each game mode and thus make more of them to keep playing off of the novelty aspect that comes with this design in the first place. And although that sounds like that means that the game modes themselves end up being worse as a whole, that's not actually the case, since the merit is pretty much always based on how fun the gimmick or quirk that the game mode brings to the table actually is. The game mode is hit or miss based on how fun or interesting the gimmick is, never on how balanced or how polished it is. So it's honestly fine to release unpolished game modes with this kind of system. And with a game mode where the merit is based on the gimmick that takes place, the novelty of the mode does become a very real thing that is relied on, meaning that it's awesome to try out and mess around at first, but it does kind of get old fast. So in taking out the game mode, it's more likely people will have a positive opinion of it, since they don't really get to play it long enough to start seeing the flaws or the decline in popularity. And as for the negatives, well, the only one really is that the game modes get taken away and become unplayable and forgotten once they're patched out. And as mentioned earlier, the gimmicks these game modes bring really are hit or miss, so most of the time it doesn't actually matter that it's taken out. But when something hits, when some aspect of the game is really nailed, and we get this fun, awesome, exciting game mode like Ultra Rapid Fire in League of Legends or the Great Summoner competition in Tavern Brawl, then after a short while the game mode goes away forever, and it honestly kind of sucks. You're left feeling like the game has taken away content from you, or that the content has become limited since you won't get to play that mode for the foreseeable future. And quite frankly, it's a little bit hard to make a case for why these game modes aren't kept around in custom games, but I guess the biggest reason is probably the fact that if a game mode is a hit, it can always be added into the game again later on as a rerun, and then the developer gets to play off once again on the hype, maybe polish it a little bit more, balance it a little bit better, and people enjoyed the game mode before, so they'll look forward to it and certainly play it when it comes back into the game, essentially doubling up on the novelty that the game mode initially came with. And so I can at least see the arguments of both sides of the equation, and I can understand why Riot and Blizzard are using this system. Now with all of that said, I honestly am not fond of game modes being handled like this. Tavern Brawl and the custom game modes League of Legends have introduced are some of the most unique and interesting experiences I've ever had playing those games, and it's a shame that they are gated by the rotations and cycled out. I'm just not a fan of limiting or gating content like this because they are essentially adding something awesome into the game and then by choice taking it out. And yes, it's true that these kinds of game modes lack longevity since they aren't really competitive and they don't really have the depth, but the thing is that both League and Hearthstone already have permanent game modes that are unpopular and are, for the most part, pretty much unplayed. Keeping unpopular game modes in the game is something that once was quite consistent, since there is bound to be a few people here and there who actually enjoy the game mode quite legitimately, and it does give the new player something to try out as well. At the very least, you could compromise and keep the popular or successful ones in custom games because honestly, not having Earth in League of Legends right now sucks. Same goes for the more popular Tavern Brawls and as well some of the other game modes for League of Legends. And while it is true that if some were to become permanent, we would likely see less of them exist in the first place, but it's worth it, or at the very least you can compromise in that area, because I do think it is fairly clear for the most part which game modes are a hit and which game modes are a miss. The argument for not implementing them in custom games is nowhere near enough to make sense, at least in my eyes, because by making them temporary in the first place, you're assuming that every game mode will either suck or not have longevity, and sure, maybe half of them are like that, but a good portion of them do have some merit, and some of them are honestly fantastic. And I love that we get to see all of these game modes exist in the first place. It's just a bummer to see them go away. But anyways, that's just my thoughts. What do you think about this trend of temporary game modes? Leave a comment, and thanks for watching.
Keep in mind we just skipped the ship well far along the way. Divine